He lived in a quiet town where everyone knew each other, but no one truly knew him. To the neighbors, he was a man who kept to himself, rarely joining in community gatherings or casual chats by the mailbox. He had a small house at the edge of the street, tucked behind tall oak trees that swayed gently with the wind. From the outside, it looked ordinary, maybe even a little unremarkable, but inside it was a place of routine and careful order. Every item had its place. Every corner was neat, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. He wasn't unfriendly, but people sensed an intensity in him that kept them at a distance. Children sometimes watched him from afar when he came out to collect the mail, but he would offer a small, polite nod and a gentle smile. Dogs barked at him curiously as he passed, but he never paid them much attention. Yet at home, there was one creature that brought out a side of him no one else ever saw. His pet was a large dog with soulful eyes and a coat that shone in the sun like polished chestnut. The dog wasn't just a companion, it was a part of his daily life, his routine and his heart. Every morning he would wake up before dawn, let the dog out into the backyard and watch as it ran freely, sniffing the earth and chasing after imaginary prey. They shared quiet moments on the porch as the world outside slowly woke up, sipping coffee and watching the morning mist settle over the trees. Sometimes he would speak to the dog in soft tones, not expecting a reply, but feeling comforted by the gentle tilt of its head or the wag of its tail. People who passed by might have thought of him as solitary or even stern, but at home he was warm, patient, and attentive. He had rituals he followed with the dog: a morning walk through the woods behind the house, lunch at the small table by the window, and evening playtime in the yard before settling into a quiet night. He would toss a ball and the dog would sprint after it with pure joy, its happiness reflected in every leap and bound. That simple exchange, a ball thrown and caught, seemed to wash away the stresses of his past, which he rarely spoke about. He had reasons for keeping his past a secret. In fact, almost no one knew who he had been before this quiet life. His background was not ordinary. It was full of danger, discipline, and experiences most people could only imagine in movies or read about in books. He had been part of a force that operated in shadows, performing missions that required extraordinary skill and precision. He had faced situations that demanded a calm mind, sharp reflexes, and a level of focus that most people couldn't even comprehend. He had learned to trust no one completely, to move quietly, and to blend into any situation without drawing attention. Yet, despite all that, he had chosen this small town, this quiet home, and this dog as his refuge. He wanted simplicity, peace, and a chance to live without the weight of the past pressing down on him. The dog in its own way helped him hold on to that peace. Its presence reminded him of normalcy, of unconditional love, and of small joys that didn't come with danger or the threat of life or death. His neighbors often commented on how calm and collected he appeared. They didn't know the hours he spent training his mind and body long before coming home from work. They didn't see the way he assessed every situation carefully, how he noticed subtle changes in his environment, how he could anticipate a problem before it happened. To them, he was simply the quiet man who walked his dog, kept his lawn neat, and occasionally waved hello. In the evenings, he liked to sit on the porch with the dog lying at his feet. Sometimes he would take out a small notebook and jot down thoughts, sketches, or plans for projects around the house. It wasn't a diary of emotions so much as a record of ideas and reminders, yet the act of writing gave him a sense of order and control. The dog would occasionally nuzzle his hand, reminding him that he wasn't alone, that there was a bond here stronger than words. Even the routine walks through the woods were a form of meditation for him. He knew every tree, every path, every hidden clearing. He moved quietly, listening to the sounds of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the distant babble of a stream. The dog ran ahead, then returned, sniffing and exploring, its tail wagging with excitement. During these walks, he allowed himself to breathe fully, to let the tension of past missions, past responsibilities, and past fears ebb away. These walks were sacred, a space where he could simply exist without expectation or danger. Despite his attempts at living quietly, he sometimes sensed that others were watching more closely than they should. Occasionally, neighbors would glance his way with curiosity or suspicion, though he had done nothing to attract it. It wasn't paranoia. It was a learned awareness from years in environments where every movement mattered. He noticed details others didn't. A car lingering a bit too long, a shadow moving oddly, a conversation paused as he walked by. He didn't act on these observations, but they reminded him that even in peace, One could never be entirely careless. The dog seemed to sense these moments too. It would grow quiet, ears pricked, eyes alert, as if aware of the tension in the air. He found comfort in its instincts, knowing that they shared a connection beyond words. The dog had saved him more than once in subtle ways, alerting him to danger, nudging him when he was lost in thought, or simply sitting close when he needed reassurance. He had friends, though very few, who knew pieces of his life. They understood that he was different, that he carried experiences and skills that most people couldn't comprehend. Yet they didn't pry. They respected his privacy, and in return, he allowed them glimpses of his warmth and humor. When he laughed, it was genuine and deep, and his friends cherished these rare moments. The dog, as always, was there, a silent witness and participant in the small joys of human connection. Sometimes the quiet life wasn't entirely peaceful. There were moments of tension, like the occasional visit from police due to neighbors' complaints about noise or disturbances, even when none existed. He handled these with calm politeness, answering questions with measured words, showing no anger or frustration. The officers left thinking everything was fine, unaware of the depth behind the calm demeanor. To him, these moments were reminders of how ordinary life could never entirely erase the lessons of the past. He also spent time maintaining the house and yard with meticulous care. Mowing the lawn, repairing fences, cleaning the garage. These tasks were simple but grounding. They gave him a sense of accomplishment and control, a stark contrast to the chaos he had left behind. Even small things like painting the fence a fresh white or planting flowers near the porch brought satisfaction. The dog often followed him during these tasks, watching curiously, occasionally running off to explore, then returning proudly as if reporting its findings. Meals were another form of routine. He cooked simply but well, enjoying the process of preparing food, setting the table, and eating quietly with the dog by his side. Sometimes he would speak to the dog, sharing thoughts about the day or commenting on the weather. These small acts reinforced the bond between them, a partnership built on trust, loyalty, and companionship. Evenings often ended the same way. Sitting on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange, he would sip a cup of tea, the dog resting at his feet, both of them content in the simplicity of the moment. The world outside could be chaotic, dangerous, or unpredictable, but here, in the small corner of the town, he found peace. And yet, deep down, there was always a shadow of his past lingering. Memories of missions, of lost comrades, of impossible decisions made in the blink of an eye, never left entirely. He carried them quietly, tucked away beneath the calm exterior. The dog helped him manage this weight, providing companionship without judgment, offering love without expectation, and reminding him that life could be lived fully, even after surviving so much. The neighbors continued to see only what they wanted to see, a man and his dog, a quiet household on a peaceful street. They did not know of the man's extraordinary past, his training, his skills, or the danger he had once faced and survived. They could not imagine the experiences that had shaped him into the person he was today. And perhaps it was better this way. Peace, after all, was fragile, and some truths were better left hidden. In this first part of his story, life seemed simple. Yet underneath the ordinary, the extraordinary waited quietly, like a shadow that had not yet disappeared. The dog, loyal and perceptive, was the link between the world he had left behind and the life he was trying to build. Together they navigated the days with a quiet understanding, sharing moments of joy, comfort, and companionship. And for the man, this life, however quiet, however small, was enough. It was a life where he could breathe, think, and feel without constant threat. It was a life where love, in its simplest form, existed in the wag of a tail, the warmth of a body at his feet, and the soft gaze of eyes that saw him without fear or judgment. The peace he had found was delicate, but it was real, and he cherished it, knowing that every day, every walk, every quiet evening was a gift he had earned through years of sacrifice, discipline, and resilience. For now the world outside could wait. Here, in the quiet of his home and the loyal presence of his dog, he had everything he needed. The morning began like any other. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. He stepped outside, coffee in hand, and watched his dog stretch and shake off the dew from the grass. They had their routine, a walk through the woods behind the house, a quiet breakfast, and a few chores around the yard. Everything seemed normal, calm, and safe. But that calm was about to be shattered in ways he could never have imagined. It started with a knock on the door, sharp, insistent, echoing against the quiet walls of his home. He wasn't surprised. Occasional knocks from neighbors, delivery people, or the local mail carrier were normal. He opened the door to find two uniformed police officers standing there, faces serious, eyes scanning the property as if looking for clues. "Good morning," he said politely. "Can I help you?" "We received a complaint," one officer said. "Noise and disturbance in this area. We just need to ask you a few questions." He frowned slightly, confused. The neighborhood was usually quiet. The dog hadn't barked excessively, and he hadn't done anything to attract attention. Still, he nodded and invited them inside. The officers stepped in, their presence filling the room with an unfamiliar tension. He noticed the way they glanced at his dog, their eyes narrowing slightly, and something about the subtle shift in their tone made him uneasy. The dog, usually calm, grew alert, ears pricked, tail stiff, sensing the undercurrent of tension he hadn't yet allowed himself to feel. "Can you tell us what happened last night?" one officer asked. "Neighbors reported hearing loud noises and seeing suspicious activity." He blinked. "I don't understand. I was home all evening. Just me and my dog." The officers exchanged glances. "We just need to make sure everything is in order. Can we see your backyard?" Reluctantly, he agreed. The dog followed him closely, sensing the growing unease. As they stepped outside, the officers' eyes scanned the yard, their hands near their belts as if preparing for something that had not yet happened. He noticed a slight hesitation in their movements, but before he could process it, one officer reached toward the dog, gesturing for it to stay back. The dog growled softly, low and warning, a sound he had only ever heard when something truly felt wrong. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the dog's head. "It's okay," he said calmly, though inside a storm was beginning to form. One of the officers, misunderstanding the protective gesture, drew a weapon. "Step back," he shouted. Time slowed. The dog, confused and frightened, barked, jumped, and tried to retreat toward him. In a moment that would change everything, the officer reacted instinctively. The sound of the shot cracked through the morning air. He froze, heart pounding, unable to process the scene in front of him. The dog lay on the ground, unmoving, its eyes still wide, filled with trust and love moments before the tragedy. "No," he shouted, dropping to his knees beside the dog. He shook it gently, but it was gone. The officers stepped back, hands raised, but it was too late. A cold emptiness filled him, spreading through his chest like fire. The officers were trying to explain, their voices rushed, full of apologies and confusion, but the words barely reached him. He heard only the echoes of the moment, the sharp report of the gun, and the life of his loyal companion slipping away. He stood slowly, every movement measured, controlled, but inside, rage and grief warred with years of discipline. The neighbors began to gather, drawn by the noise, murmuring questions and whispers. He ignored them, focusing only on the still body of the dog he had loved more than anything else in the world. For a long moment, he simply knelt there, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of loss settle deep into his bones. The officers tried again to speak, but he raised a hand, silencing them. His mind, trained for years in high-stakes operations, began to work methodically, analyzing what had just happened. He noted every detail, the positions of the officers, their movements, the timing of the shot, and the reaction of the dog. The grief was heavy, suffocating, but beneath it, a different feeling began to rise, calculated, controlled, dangerous. Not anger for the sake of violence, but a focused resolve to understand, to investigate, and to ensure that nothing like this could happen again. He knew he had to be careful. He knew the world didn't understand him, and any sudden movement, any misstep could escalate further. The officers were retreating slightly, realizing the intensity in his gaze. They offered their condolences again, but he hardly registered them. All he could feel was the absence of the small, loyal presence that had been by his side for years. After the officers left, he remained kneeling in the yard, staring at the ground. The neighborhood was quiet again, but the quiet was hollow. The normalcy he had built with such care had been shattered in a single moment. He felt the loss not only of the dog, but of the peace he had fought so hard to maintain. As the hours passed, he began to process what had happened. First came the grief, sharp and raw, unrelenting. Then came the questions. Why had the officers reacted so hastily? Why had no one tried to calm the situation before it escalated? And most importantly, how could he ensure this never happened again? He began by gathering information. He spoke to neighbors not with anger but with curiosity, piecing together the version of events as seen through their eyes. He learned that someone had called in a report, exaggerating noises and misinterpreting normal movements as suspicious. Miscommunication, fear, and misunderstanding had led to the irreversible tragedy. He didn't lash out, didn't storm the police station or create a scene. That wasn't who he was, at least not anymore. But inside his mind was alive with calculation. Years of experience in high-pressure situations had trained him to analyze every detail, to anticipate outcomes, to plan several steps ahead. The same instincts that had once guided him through dangerous missions now turned inward, shaping the path toward justice for his lost companion. At night, he sat in his living room, staring at the empty space where the dog used to sleep. The silence was deafening, filled with memories of mornings and evenings spent together, walks in the woods, shared meals, and quiet conversations that only they understood. He felt the weight of loneliness settle in, heavier than any mission he had ever undertaken. The dog had been more than a companion. It had been a bridge to the peace he had so carefully cultivated. Sleep came fitfully. He dreamed of the dog running through fields, barking happily, oblivious to danger. And then the dreams shifted, showing flashes of the officers, their weapons drawn the moment of the shot. He woke in a cold sweat, heart racing, but the clarity of thought that always came with grief settled in. He knew that in order to prevent this from happening again, he had to understand every detail, every angle, every choice that had led to this moment. The next morning, he began a careful investigation. He revisited the scene, noting the trajectory, the distance, the positions of the officers and the dog. He talked to neighbors again, this time more methodically, cross-referencing their observations with his own memories. Every detail mattered. Every small discrepancy, every overlooked fact, could provide insight into how the tragedy had occurred. Even as he worked, he maintained his outward calm. To the outside world, he was simply a man mourning his pet, taking care of his home and walking through the quiet neighborhood. No one could see the storm of analysis and planning happening inside his mind. He reviewed footage from security cameras, checked the time of the call, and mapped out the sequence of events in precise order. The grief was still present, sharp and cutting, but it was accompanied by a rising determination to seek understanding, and, if necessary, justice. Friends who visited noticed the change. He was quieter, more focused, his eyes carrying a depth that spoke of grief and controlled intensity. They offered condolences, shared memories, and tried to comfort him, but he nodded politely and returned to his work. The dog's absence was a constant presence, a reminder of both loss and purpose. As days passed, he realized that the incident had exposed more than just a personal tragedy. It revealed the fragility of assumptions, the danger of miscommunication, and the consequences of fear-driven decisions. It showed him that even in a quiet town, the world could be unpredictable, and that vigilance, careful observation, and preparation were never truly out of place. He began to see patterns, small signs that had gone unnoticed, small errors in judgment, and small missed opportunities that had contributed to the tragedy. Every detail became a piece of a larger puzzle, one he was determined to solve. The investigation was not just about understanding what had happened, but about ensuring accountability and preventing similar incidents from harming anyone else. And through it all, he felt the constant quiet presence of his lost companion in his mind. The dog had been more than a pet. It had been a source of stability, a measure of calm in a life that had once been filled with chaos. Its absence was a wound that would not heal quickly, but it also became a driving force, compelling him to act thoughtfully, deliberately, and with precision. He moved through the neighborhood with renewed awareness, noticing things he had never seen before, the patterns of traffic, the timing of patrols, the way people moved and interacted. He watched quietly, analyzed carefully, and prepared himself for the next steps. This was not about revenge. It was about clarity, justice, and restoring a sense of order that had been violently disrupted. Evenings became times of reflection. He sat on the porch, staring at the empty space where the dog used to rest. replaying memories, imagining what might have been, and planning for what needed to be done. The grief was still raw, but it was tempered by purpose. He understood that he could not change the past, but he could influence the future, and so with each passing day he moved forward, carrying the memory of his loyal companion in his heart, and the determination to seek understanding in his mind. The tragedy had shaken him, but it had not broken him. It had awakened a focus, a clarity, and a resolve that could not be ignored. The ordinary life he had once known was gone. In its place, a new reality had taken shape. A world where careful observation, thoughtful action, and measured response were more important than ever. And at the center of it all was the memory of the dog, whose love and loyalty had left an indelible mark on a man who had once known only chaos, danger, and discipline. Days had passed since the loss of his companion, yet the grief refused to leave him. Each morning he woke with a hollow ache in his chest, a reminder that the familiar weight of life had shifted irreversibly. The house felt emptier, the yard quieter, and even the sunlight seemed dimmer as it filtered through the windows. But alongside the grief, something else was stirring, a deep, controlled awareness that had lain dormant for years. It began as a faint echo, a memory of discipline, of training, of missions that required the utmost precision. He remembered the early mornings of his former life, long before this quiet existence, when the sun rose on barren training grounds rather than peaceful forests. Back then, every muscle, every thought, every reflex was honed to perfection. Survival depended on anticipation, awareness, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. Mistakes were not tolerated. Hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. That same intensity now awakened within him, tempered by time and the calm of ordinary life, but no less potent. He began to reflect on his time in Delta Force, not with pride or bravado, but with a sense of clarity. He remembered the rigorous selection process, the grueling training that pushed the body and mind to extremes. He remembered operations conducted in darkness in hostile territory, where one false step could destroy the mission and cost lives. Every decision was calculated, every action deliberate, and every outcome carefully considered. He had been shaped by those experiences, forged in situations that most people could never imagine, and now those skills were resurfacing. The loss of his dog had triggered more than grief. It had awakened instincts honed over years in environments that demanded focus, patience, and strategy. He realized that his current world, so peaceful on the surface, required a different kind of vigilance, and he was prepared to meet it. He began by revisiting the scene of the tragedy. He walked the yard slowly, noting details he had overlooked in his initial grief. The angles of the officers' movements, the timing of their entry, the way the dog had reacted to sudden commands. Every observation was precise, catalogued carefully in his mind. He imagined the sequence again and again, analyzing the decision-making, the errors, and the moments where the situation could have been diffused. Night brought no relief. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by flashes of memory and the vivid recall of missions past. He remembered moments of extreme pressure, situations in which he had been alone, responsible for the lives of others, and forced to act with absolute precision. In those memories, he saw patterns emerge, ways of thinking and responding that could be applied now. He was no longer in combat zones, but the principles of awareness, preparation, and controlled action still applied. Friends who checked in noticed a quiet intensity in his demeanor. He spoke less, observed more, and carried a weight that seemed both familiar and foreign to those who knew only the man at home. They could sense his grief, but they could not see the disciplined, strategic mind beneath it, calculating steps, assessing risks, and preparing for action. They only saw a man mourning, unaware that within him a silent force was awakening, responding to injustice with clarity and focus. He began to draw on tools he had long since put aside. Maps, notes, sketches. He used them not for battle planning, but for understanding the events that had led to the loss of his companion. Every detail mattered: distances, angles, timing, and sequences. He was methodical, patient, and deliberate, approaching the investigation with the same intensity he had once applied to high-stakes missions. Nothing was left to chance, no assumption accepted without verification. The neighborhood itself became a study in observation. He walked streets with a quiet awareness, noting movement, patterns, and behaviors. He saw the rhythm of daily life and recognized anomalies that others would dismiss. The sound of tires on pavement, The angle of shadows in alleyways, the timing of footsteps. Each observation was catalogued, analyzed, and stored for later use. This was not paranoia. It was awareness, honed to a razor's edge by years of training and experience. Memories of past comrades surfaced as well, moments of camaraderie and trust forged under extreme circumstances. He remembered faces, voices, and lessons learned through shared trials. They had relied on him, and he had relied on them. The weight of responsibility had always been clear, and failure was never an option. Though he had left that world behind, those lessons remained, a constant undercurrent shaping his thoughts and actions. The dog's absence was a constant shadow, but it also became a symbol. It was a reminder of loyalty, trust, and the cost of misunderstanding. He felt a quiet anger, not blind rage, but a controlled determination to prevent such tragedy from happening again. He understood that the officers had not acted out of malice, but out of fear and miscommunication. Yet even so, the consequences were irreversible, and he could not let that stand without response. He began to develop a plan, not a plan of violence, but a plan of clarity, accountability, and action. He reviewed every interaction, every decision made by those involved, and began to anticipate their next moves. He thought through responses, contingencies, and outcomes with the same meticulous care that had guided him through past missions. Every step was deliberate, every choice calculated, and every action designed to restore balance without unnecessary harm. During this time, he also allowed himself small moments of reflection, remembering happier times with his companion. He thought of walks in the woods, quiet evenings on the porch, and mornings spent watching the sunrise. These memories were painful but grounding, reminding him of the connection that had been lost and the importance of acting with both care and purpose. The dog had been more than a pet. It had been a partner in a life that had once been ordinary and peaceful, a symbol of the life he was trying to protect. He began to see parallels between his past missions and the current situation. While the stakes were different, the principles were the same: observation, planning, and controlled execution. He used his knowledge of human behavior, patterns, and responses to anticipate how the investigation would unfold, how others would react, and how he could influence outcomes. Every action was deliberate, every decision informed by experience. Despite the intensity of his focus, he remained outwardly calm. Neighbors continued to see a man grieving quietly, walking through the yard, tending to his home, and moving through the streets with measured steps. They could not sense the storm of thought and strategy within him, the careful calculations that guided every decision. To them, he was still the quiet man with a dog, unaware of the extraordinary depth of skill and discipline beneath the surface. He also revisited his own past, reflecting on the reasons he had left that world behind. He remembered the toll it had taken, the lives lost, the friendships forged and broken, and the constant awareness of danger that had shaped him. He had chosen this quiet life to escape that intensity, to find peace and to build something ordinary and human. But the tragedy of his companion had shown him that even ordinary life required vigilance, patience, and careful action. The next step was understanding the system that had allowed the tragedy to occur. He began to study protocols, reports, and procedures, noting inconsistencies, gaps, and errors. He approached the work with precision, cataloging facts, cross-referencing information, and building a detailed picture of events. His focus was relentless, each discovery feeding a growing clarity about what had happened and what needed to be done. He also began to anticipate the responses of the officers and authorities involved. He imagined their thoughts, actions, and potential mistakes, using his understanding of human behavior and decision-making to predict outcomes. He planned how to address these actions with precision, ensuring accountability while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. His approach was disciplined, controlled, and calculated, a reflection of the years of experience that had shaped him. Even as he worked, he allowed himself brief moments of emotional release. He remembered the simple joys shared with his companion, the playful bark, the warmth of a head resting on his lap, the sense of loyalty that had been unwavering. These moments were painful but necessary, grounding him in humanity even as his mind operated with tactical precision. The loss was real, raw, and unforgettable, but it also became fuel for focus and determination. His training had taught him that emotion and logic could coexist if managed correctly. He applied that principle now, channeling grief into analysis, pain into planning, and loyalty into purpose. Every step was deliberate, every observation catalogued, and every decision informed by experience. The tragedy had awakened more than grief. It had reawakened a sense of discipline, clarity, and strategic thought that had lain dormant for years. He began to see the path forward clearly. It was not a path of vengeance, but of understanding and accountability. It was a path that required careful observation, meticulous planning, and precise action. He would not act impulsively, but he would act effectively. He would ensure that the events leading to the loss of his companion were understood, addressed, and prevented from repeating. In quiet moments, he would sit in the spaces they had once shared, imagining the dog by his side, recalling its loyalty and the simple bond they had shared. Those memories were painful but also grounding, reminding him of the stakes and the importance of careful action. He understood that the past could not be changed, but the future could be influenced with clarity, precision, and deliberate action. As part 3 of his story unfolded, the quiet life he had built was intersecting with the extraordinary skills he had developed in a past world most could never imagine. The tragedy had drawn him out of ordinary existence and back into the mindset of focus, strategy, and calculated action. Grief and discipline coexisted, guiding him toward a path of understanding, accountability, and controlled response. He was no longer simply a man mourning a lost companion. He was a strategist, an observer, and a planner, ready to navigate a world that had proven unpredictable and dangerous. The lessons of his past were now intertwined with the pain of the present, creating a force of clarity and resolve that would guide the next steps of his journey. The quiet life he had sought was gone, replaced by a purpose shaped by loss, skill, and an unwavering commitment to understanding. The memory of his companion remained at the center, a symbol of loyalty, love, and the stakes that demanded careful, deliberate action. And as the days unfolded, he prepared himself, quietly but decisively, for the challenges and revelations that lay ahead. The days following the tragedy were heavy, but he could no longer allow grief alone to dominate his life. The loss of his companion had created a void, sharp and unyielding, but it had also awakened a sense of purpose he could not ignore. He knew that the death had been preventable, caused by carelessness and fear, and he could not accept leaving it unresolved. Each morning, he woke with a focused clarity, a quiet determination that had been absent in the days immediately following the incident. He began by reviewing everything he could find about the event. He remembered the knock on the door, the presence of the officers, the sudden panic that had erupted in a fraction of a second, and the sound of the gunshot that had ended his companion's life. He replayed it over and over in his mind, not out of obsession, but as a methodical process to understand exactly what had happened. He had spent his life analyzing situations, anticipating movements, and learning to respond with precision.
Now those same skills were applied to a deeply personal investigation. He revisited the scene multiple times,
Walking slowly through the yard, measuring distances, noting angles, and imagining the positions of everyone involved. He recorded observations in a small notebook, drawing diagrams and jotting down details. Every sound, every movement, every reaction became a piece of a larger puzzle. He analyzed how fear and misunderstanding could escalate, how a single misstep could result in irreversible consequences. Neighbors noticed his movements, though they didn't understand them. They saw a man tending to his yard, pacing carefully and making notes, but they had no idea of the depth of his analysis. Some whispered curiosity, while others offered tentative concern, asking if he was coping. He smiled politely, appreciating their worry, but he knew this process was private. It was not only about understanding what had happened, it was about preventing such a mistake from occurring again. He also began to seek information from outside sources. He called the precinct under the guise of general inquiry, asking about procedures, reports, and protocols. The answers were often vague, bureaucratic, or incomplete. He noted each inconsistency carefully. These small gaps told a story just as clearly as words on paper. They revealed negligence, miscommunication, and the flaws in a system that could allow tragedy to strike in a single, thoughtless moment. Every piece of information he gathered was scrutinized, cross-checked, and cataloged. He created timelines, diagrams, and mental maps of the incident. It was painstaking work, but it gave him control over the chaos that had erupted in his life. His mind, trained for precision in dangerous environments, thrived in this focused effort. Grief remained, but it was channeled into purpose rather than paralysis. The dog's memory fueled his determination. He remembered the warmth of its fur, the loyal gaze that had greeted him each morning, and the simple joys of their shared life. Those memories were both comforting and painful, but they reminded him why he had to act. This was not about revenge. It was about accountability and understanding. He owed it to his companion to ensure that such carelessness would not happen again, to prevent another life from being lost in a similar way. At night, he studied patterns in human behavior, considering how the officers had reacted, how fear had influenced decisions, and how misunderstanding had escalated the situation. He reflected on his own past experiences in high-stakes environments, remembering how fear and uncertainty could cloud judgment. He used these lessons to anticipate responses, to consider every potential outcome, and to develop a strategy that was effective yet restrained. The moral weight of the situation pressed on him. He had the skills to act in ways that could have drastic consequences, but he was determined not to let anger dictate his choices. He understood the thin line between justice and vengeance, between accountability and harm. Each decision had to be deliberate, measured, and guided by principle rather than emotion. His goal was not to punish, but to ensure clarity, responsibility, and correction. He reached out discreetly to people who could provide insight. Friends, acquaintances, and even former colleagues who still had ties to law enforcement offered perspectives he could use. He asked questions carefully, avoiding suspicion, and pieced together additional details about procedures, expectations, and past incidents. Every conversation was part of a larger picture, allowing him to build a full understanding of how a simple call had spiraled into irreversible loss. He also analyzed the officers themselves. He observed their movements, reviewed their reported actions, and anticipated their reactions to scrutiny. He did not intend to intimidate, but he knew that understanding human behavior was key to addressing the situation effectively. His mind, trained to read subtle cues and anticipate decisions, gave him insight that few others could claim. This allowed him to plan each step with precision, avoiding unnecessary confrontation while maximizing the likelihood of accountability. While conducting his investigation, he maintained his routine. The yard needed care, meals needed preparation, and daily walks through the woods were essential for grounding himself. These activities were not distractions. They were a way to manage emotion, maintain clarity, and keep perspective. The dog's absence was felt in every moment, a reminder of both love and loss, but also of the life he needed to navigate with care and focus. Every discovery he made, every inconsistency he noted, added to a growing sense of understanding. He began to see not only what had gone wrong, but why it had gone wrong. He identified gaps in training, flaws in communication, and systemic weaknesses that had allowed fear and misunderstanding to escalate. Each realization strengthened his resolve to act with precision and clarity, ensuring that the incident would not be repeated. He thought often about responsibility and trust. His life had once been defined by trust among comrades, by the need to rely on others in life or death situations. The lessons from that world applied now in subtle but critical ways. Trust had been violated in a different form, the trust between a citizen and those sworn to protect. The failure had been catastrophic, but it could also be a lesson if approached with intelligence, patience, and careful planning. His plan began to take shape. He would compile evidence, organize observations, and identify the key factors that led to the tragedy. He would approach the responsible authorities with a clear, factual account, leaving emotion aside. He understood that confrontation without preparation could backfire, and that clarity and evidence would be more powerful than anger. This was a strategic effort, guided by experience and driven by a desire for justice rather than revenge. Even as he prepared, he felt the internal tension between grief and action. The loss of his companion remained raw, a wound that could not be ignored. Yet he understood that grief alone would not change anything. Action, informed by precision, observation, and principle, was required. He balanced emotion and intellect carefully, ensuring that one did not cloud the other. In quiet moments, he reflected on the bond he had shared with his companion. Those reflections were painful but essential, reminding him of loyalty, love, and the responsibility he now carried. The dog had trusted him, and in its absence, he honored that trust by approaching the situation with the same care intelligence, and measured focus that had defined his life in high-stakes environments. His observation extended beyond the immediate incident. He began to consider patterns in law enforcement behavior, community reactions, and the broader system that allowed mistakes to occur. He noted areas where accountability could be strengthened, where procedures could be clarified, and where communication could be improved. His analysis was comprehensive, not limited to a single act, but encompassing the context in which it had occurred. Even as he built his plan, he maintained outward calm. Friends and neighbors continued to see a man quietly mourning, walking his property and keeping to his routines. They did not know the depth of thought, analysis, and preparation that was underway. To them, he appeared composed, patient, and reserved. Inside, however, a precise, focused effort was unfolding, aimed at restoring order and accountability in the wake of tragedy. He also prepared for contingencies. He considered how different responses might unfold, how misunderstandings could occur, and how to mitigate risks. Every potential scenario was analyzed, every variable accounted for, and every step carefully planned. His experience had taught him that preparation was essential, and he applied this lesson with meticulous care. As days turned into weeks, his work continued. He documented, observed, and analyzed, building a comprehensive understanding of the incident and the factors that had contributed to it. Each discovery was cataloged, each insight noted, and each conclusion carefully weighed. The grief that had initially overwhelmed him became a motivating force, driving focus and clarity rather than despair. Through it all, he remained connected to the memory of his companion. The dog's absence was a constant presence, a reminder of love, loyalty, and the cost of mistakes. Those feelings were neither ignored nor indulged. They were channeled into purpose, guiding each decision and action with care and precision. He began to see the path forward clearly. It was not a path of retaliation or anger, but a path of understanding, accountability, and measured action. He would not allow grief or emotion to dictate choices. Instead, he relied on observation, analysis, and careful planning to ensure that the truth of the incident would be revealed and addressed. The days of mourning and reflection were transforming into days of deliberate action. The quiet, disciplined approach that had once defined his life in high-pressure situations now applied to the world he inhabited, a world that had been disrupted by a single tragic event. Each step was calculated, each observation meaningful, and each action aligned with a commitment to clarity, justice, and responsibility. In the evenings, he would sit in the spaces once shared with his companion, reviewing notes, reflecting on observations, and planning next steps. The grief remained, but it had become a guiding force, shaping decisions, motivating preparation, and reinforcing the importance of deliberate, intelligent action. He was no longer simply a man mourning a lost companion. He was a strategist, an observer, and a planner, ready to navigate the complexities of a system that had failed and a world that had caused loss. The lessons of his past, combined with the discipline of the present, were guiding him toward clarity, understanding, and accountability. The memory of his companion remained at the center of every decision, a symbol of loyalty, love, and the stakes that demanded careful thought. He understood that the path ahead would require patience, precision, and resilience. Grief and purpose now walked side by side, guiding each step with deliberate care and unwavering focus. He had transformed his sorrow into strategy, his pain into observation, and his loss into determination. The days ahead would test his patience, intellect, and resolve, but he was prepared. The lessons of the past, the memory of his companion, and the clarity of his mind would guide him through the challenges yet to come. And in this process, he knew that the quiet, ordinary life he had once sought would never return in the same form. It had been replaced by a life defined not by ease but by focus, responsibility, and a commitment to ensuring that tragedy would not repeat itself. Every step, every observation, and every action now carried the weight of loss, the precision of experience, and the clarity of purpose.